Thank you. Great to be back. That's me, Brewster Kahle, founder of the Internet Archive. So in general, the Internet Archive has been trying to digitize the past and put it online for free public access. But we've also been then trying to take the born digital and make it permanent. Can we? And as was related, this is a forward-looking talk in a couple of different ways. It's forward-looking in the how should things be done, but also because it doesn't exist yet, which I rarely like to talk about, but it's actually something that doesn't exist yet, but I'm hoping to cause it to exist by giving this talk. We've spent the last 25 years of our lives putting our lives into the World Wide Web, by putting ourselves, trusting the World Wide Web with our thoughts, our dreams, our ideas, our papers. We've been putting it all out there, which has been fabulous. But there's some problems. The way the web is coded really determines the way we live our lives online. So as friend and hero Larry Lessig puts it, code is law. So the way the web is coded really determines how we live our lives online. Yet, how the web is coded should have our values baked into it, whether it's freedom of expression or universal access to all knowledge, the privacy structures that we want to live in, but it doesn't. We now know it really doesn't. It doesn't have a lot of those things, but the web is big. So the World Wide Web, we collect about 1 billion pages every week of the World Wide Web, adding it and learning about it. Now about 450 billion pages in the Wayback Machine. So it's huge, but we also know that the life of a web page is about 100 days before it's either changed or it's deleted. So it's flipping on and off servers all the time. Also, it's massively available, right? You can now get access. You can just type in a URL into some place in Korea. Fantastic. You're just beaming over there. You're getting whatever it is you want and all those things. And so it's massively available, unless you live in China, where the Internet Archive, the New York Times are blocked. We're currently blocked, we believe, in most of Russia, and India goes and unblocks and unblocks things. So the Internet is not reliable in any sort of durably accessible or over space or time. It's also not private. I had a chilling time reading an article in The Intercept based on Snowden's revelations that the GCHQ watched everyone using WikiLeaks, the IP addresses, which are personally identifiable in most or all circumstances, and then gave those to the NSA for further interrogation. The NSA then used those, and that those people went to WikiLeaks, justified their spying on them inside the United States. Libraries have had a long history of grappling with reader privacy. The idea of people being rounded up for what it is they've read has a long and dreadful history. And so we have built a system, and it is being currently used in this way to target people based on what it is they now read.
A quick question. Yeah, you and I have known each other a long time, but when I talk about the archive to areas more remote from the Bay Area, they actually think you're funded by the CIA or the NSA.
It's factually incorrect.
Yeah.
But I think they should be worried about me too, right? I mean, it's not like, oh, well, glad Brewster's doing it. He's benevolent. He wouldn't do anything, blah, 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 right? No, we have to worry about these particular issues. But the third aspect of the web, whether it's reliable, private, it is fun. Right? We basically built something that is so interesting and fun to play with and malleable that people have been piling into the web and doing interesting things with it. So out of the big three goals, I would suggest, reliability, private, and fun, we got 1 out of the 3. I would suggest we shoot for higher than that. I suggest it's now time to go for all 3 of these. And been trying to figure out how we might be able to do this. So this is a call for a distributed web. So this distributed web would involve peer-to-peer and structures that would be sort of newer structures, but I'd suggest it's doable, and some of the pieces are being done, and that's what this talk is towards. But what do I mean by distributed? So distributed, people say, well, the World Wide Web is distributed. It's all over the place. It's like, yeah, yes and no. It's if you were to take any particular piece of hardware out, you would nail a website, for instance, or a user. Or if you put a boundary right in front of a website, you can see everybody that's going in and out of it. It's partitionable. It's fragile in that way. So let's talk about what does distributed really mean in this context. Would be something like the internet. So the internet, it takes, and it's designed, we're told that any particular part of it could be nuked, literally, and it would still route around and work. So it doesn't require any particular piece of it to work. Of course, if you partition it enough, it will eventually die. But the internet itself, and actually there's a talk, and I confirmed it with Vint Cerf, that it took him about a year being in pretty much a closed room with a bunch of very smart people, small group of people, to try to make the internet protocol such that it worked in a distributed way. It is harder to build a distributed system than it is to build sort of a point-to-point system like the World Wide Web. The World Wide Web was fabulous. Tim Berners-Lee did a great job. By making something really simple, you could write, back in the day, you could go and write a web server in a few dozen lines of Perl code, and it would be kind of up and running, and you could get it going. It is harder to build a distributed system. Let's take another example of a distributed system and the way I'd like to look at it. Let's take the Amazon cloud. The Amazon cloud is made up of data centers that are all over the world, and they've got the technologies to make it so that if a web service starts to get popular, it starts to replicate itself and go on to more hardware. If parts of the hardware go down, it goes and fixes it. If there's more people in different area using the service, it migrates. So they've got an ability to do a distributed system of computational structure on the Amazon cloud, which is fantastic. What if we could make the World Wide Web kind of like that for everybody? Is there a way of making the next generation website, without having it be owned and operated by a corporation, be able to operate in some of those ways? If we're going to start going down, the sort of the punch list of sort of what do we want out of the web originally, and certainly at this point in post-Snowden, we would like to make it so that it has reader privacy baked in, so that it really is very difficult to figure out what it is any particular person has seen, or take a website, what are all the people that have seen that website? Is there a mechanism of trying to do that? This turns out to be one of the hardest features to try to figure out how to build into this, which is odd for me because in the physical world, it used to be publishing anonymously was hard, but reading anonymously was easy. You put it in a brown paper bag and pass it around, and that sort of worked. But actually publishing now anonymously on the World Wide Web, I would suggest is easier to figure out how to make that happen than it is to make reading anonymous. But I'd say it's particularly important. Let's go for another couple features. Let's build in a time axis this time. The Wayback Machine is a kludge put on top of the World Wide Web to try to give it a time axis. And it only works kind of barely. It tries to take snapshots of web pages so that they're not living websites. They're actually just snapshots of what they look like, and and you have to know to go there. It's not even built into the browsers yet, such that you hit a 404, it goes to the Wayback Machine. So it's not even woven in. So the Wayback Machine is a good start, but we're really suffering, I suggest, that the original architecture of the web never had a time axis in it. It was as if every day is a new day. There is no previous edition of a book. It's like the current book is the only book. There it is, right? Everything in the past has been erased. So let's build in a time axis into the world. Maybe kind of like a Git or something like that so you can see, or Wikipedia has it on a centralized basis. Another thing we're suffering from is we don't have a mechanism to make it so you can charge for things on the World Wide Web in any way worthwhile. It just doesn't work. You can go and make money by having Google have ads that are on it, or you can kind of sell your stuff through Amazon, but it doesn't seem to work terribly well. Okay, so that's my wish list. The technologies that Tim Berners-Lee had available to him 25 years ago were scant compared to what we've got now. So some of the fun things that I've seen that we have now as building blocks that we can use, I'd say the leading one is JavaScript. What a mind blow. JavaScript has a capability, it was the aha moment for me, was seeing an IBM PC or an Apple II boot in my browser in JavaScript. And so it booted up, and then it loaded virtual floppy, and I was playing Oregon Trail. And the idea that that was working inside JavaScript, that a computer maybe 10, 15 years ago was running at speed in JavaScript, cross-compiled from C, meant that we've gotten someplace. We can distribute code very easily and smoothly and build that as an operating system. We've also got some other technologies. We've got public and private key encryption. That wasn't available to us back then. It existed, but it was illegal to distribute it. The NSA basically called it a munition, and it was a big problem until the crypto wars in the 1990s. And basically, Vint Cerf had to go and build an unencrypted internet, which was, oops, and the World Wide Web didn't have it built in at all. We have blockchain that can go and help with some of the distributed nature of things like naming, and we have Bitcoin that make it so that we can actually do a distributed system of payment structures. So we've gotten some technologies that we can play with. Okay, so airware so far, right? So gosh, glad I came to a lecture about a guy wishing something existed. Well, there are a lot of people working on pieces of the project, but I don't think they're woven together very well. As I've started to talk to people about this, I've been finding that the more and more of these things, parts of it exist. There's Maelstrom by BitTorrent, and now I think they just renamed it Surf, which is a browser that works out of torrents, MadeSafe, Namecoin, Ephemerum, Bitcoin for payments, IPFS, Juan Bennett gave a talk here a couple of weeks ago. He's doing fabulous things in the whole area of making a peer-to-peer file system. So it just looks like a file system to you, but it's served in a peer-to-peer structure, and it works really quite well. So there are a lot of these technologies where people are coming at the distributed nature and doing the hard work of making it so that there's no centralized points of control and making these works. So what about a bold goal to try to weave things together towards something that would be understandable? I'm going to suggest what we want is WordPress, but distributed. According to some statistics, 25% of all websites are WordPress websites. I mean, it's a very popular, easy to use tool. You can just go and log in to WordPress.com and you can start up this thing, or you can download the tool and you can run it, and you can set up your own themes. You have different, people have different roles. There are people that can go and post to it, and you can delegate authority. So it has identity system, it has themes, it's got hosting, it's even got a distributed. What if we could make it that easy, but to make it so that our website has those basic principles of reliability, privacy, and still fun? What would it take to do it? So here's the pieces that I would suggest are necessary. There can't be a new browser. It has to work on your phone. And in fact, it has to be done in such a way that whoever controls your phone, which is not you, can't turn it off, right? Can't say, oh, we don't like that distributed web. So it has to be no browser, no plugins, no nothing. It has to have good names, so it's easy to use. It has to be on top of the existing web. So you use your existing browser and you're now using a distributed website. It just plain works. It has to be snappy, awesome. It has to be fun in that sort of cool internet kind of way. And if we really do our job right, we get these extra bonus points if we can get some payments and tip system built in and a versioning system. I'm going to suggest that each one of these is possible, and I'm just going to step through them. Let's go and take the first one, which is can we make it work in a browser? So there was a couple of things that were missing out of making a browser to be able to work with a distributed website. This would be a website that doesn't exist in any particular place. This is a website that's distributed in a peer-to-peer system. The more people using that website, the more servers there are. The more people reading the website, the more people serving it. There's nothing you can go and do to go and take out a particular piece of hardware and that website goes away. That if we can go and build a distributed web structure that works with all those different things, we can make it go. Can you do this on top of a normal browser? And with the combination of WebRTC, which is a peer-to-peer oriented structure for opening a socket to another browser, plus the power of JavaScript, the answer is yes. You can actually, there's a guy that's written the BitTorrent protocol in JavaScript. So the idea of building at that level is doable. Also, as I mentioned, the idea of running CD-ROM-based games and having them look awesome and play in JavaScript is a reality. So the performance, the capabilities of JavaScript, I would say normal browser, yes, that we could make it so that if a browser manufacturer is going to make it work for getting to Wells Fargo, they're going to be able to make it work for the distributed web, which is very helpful to go and make sure that we can't be locked out. Demo. Okay, so I'm going to demo a very short piece of this, and I'm going to do the thing that most people at given talks never want to do, which is a live demo in front of them all. So if this works, you're going to have to applause. Okay, so what is this? I asked a programmer in Amsterdam to take my blog, which was written on WordPress, and try to make it work in this peer-to-peer structure. Basically make it so that it doesn't have a server anymore, but still works. And what does work mean? In this sense, it doesn't have identities, it doesn't have a lot of things, but it has the basic pages, and it has a search engine that actually works, because there's usually some server-side things like a database or a search engine, and basically he's written the search engine such that it is in JavaScript with its index. So if this works, then I demand applause. Okay. And, okay. Brings up the browser. And, well, works is not quite there yet. Let's see, I have to go to mirror display? I guess so. All right. Ta-da! Okay, so what you're seeing here is my blog. At the top, it's actually it's a gateway. If I were running the code on my machine, which I can do very easily and start it up, then I would actually use my own as part of the node of the network. And it's got a hash for my website address. So this doesn't have the easy names yet that we need, but it's basically running out of a peer-to-peer system. And if I go to a, I'm actually typing in and using a search engine that's running completely locally. So, this is not, you say, okay, there's another piece. Okay, I can look around in my blog and be able to see a website that's running in a peer-to-peer mode. There is no server. And it's actually pretty snappy and pretty fun to use. So this is a mirror. Use a separate display. See if I can get this back to. Am I back? I'm not back. Hello. I'm kind of back. Go. I add it for a moment. So I don't want to mirror. Use a separate display. All right, okay. So, and there's another sort of how I can use my own local machine if I start up the IPFS daemon. I've also gone and taken this and moved it into Maelstrom, into a BitTorrent that moves around as a BitTorrent from place to place and has multiple places. And then I run it through a browser that can go and source things, not just through HTTPS, but through the BitTorrent protocol. So the idea of using the peer-to-peer system is actually, that part is working. We also need an easy name system. For instance, it would be great if you could just say brewstersblog.nl or something like that and have that work. So we'd like a really distributed name system that is different from the DNS in the sense that we wouldn't have ICANN, and we'd have a mechanism of having it so that websites don't get shuttered based on offending some power that be. We got a call at the Internet Archive. We're the number 250th most popular website, and we got a contact from Network Solutions, which I don't even think was our registrar, and they said, we got a complaint this morning that you're hosting something that's not good, and we're going to turn off your website in 2 hours. And I said, what are you talking about? And so I had to get EFF to go and call them and to try, calm them down about whatever. But the idea that there's some low-level droid at Network Solution that can go and shut off a the number 250 website based on somebody sending an email about something is a little scary and precarious state. So let's do a better name system than that. We also want performance and versions. This thing has to be snappy. And one thing that most people who use BitTorrent say it's not snappy. It really doesn't work terribly well. Here I would suggest we could use our cultural institutions like the Internet Archive to play a role of playing host. That we would be very interested, the Internet Archive is, in basically having copies of living websites. What would be much better for us than taking snapshots of existing websites is we'd like to have living websites. Libraries take works from professors and then put them on shelves in such a way that they can go be used after the professor wants to move on to something else. Why can't we do that with websites now? Right now, you have websites that are part of your project or whatever, and then when the funding runs out, it's a problem because a lot of people are starting to depend on it. Well, there might be copies in the Wayback Machine, but it's just snapshots. It's not a living website. You try to get somebody to take it over, and all of that is fairly difficult to do. Can we make archivable websites from the beginning? Can we make it so that websites live in multiple places, including in cultural institutions such as the Internet Archive? There are other organizations that would be very interested in performing the seeding role, the hosting role of these distributed websites. And it would be the ISPs. If you were able to be an ISP that would offer improved performance by having a cache of living websites closer to your users, why not? A petabyte just doesn't cost that much anymore. So going and making it so that it's faster for your users and also make the web more reliable, that can work. And the idea of versions is sort of built into this because sort of every website version is copied around with these hashes. And so there's a concept of what's the newest, but you can go and look at the past versions in just the same way that you can look at the current version. So if we build this right, we have versions, we have snappy performance, we have cultural institutions playing a living actual role in this, ISPs going and helping build distributed caching environments without having to be permissioned or a CDN. It's sort of building in CDNs into the existing system. Updates, but distributed. How do we do this? One of the problems in BitTorrent tends to be that you're looking at a hash of the contents, and so if the contents change, you're not pointing at it anymore. There's been a couple of different approaches towards how do you do this naming system so you have a hash that points to something that can mutate underneath it, and IPFS right now I think has the best version of that, but you need this, otherwise everything you put up is completely static, which is the problem we have with BitTorrents. We made everything in the Internet Archive, all public materials, petabytes of it, available via BitTorrent, and people go and download those, but if the materials are updated, then it's kind of a problem because people don't know what the newest version is without going back to the web, so we have to build in updates structures into this. Distributed identity system. How do we make it so that you have your identity so that your blog knows it's you again, and then you can delegate to other people, but say let's make it a pseudonymous system so that it's enduringly know that it's you, but it may, you may want to disavow yourself of that particular identity in the future. We know how to do these things, we just didn't build it in very well. And the idea of counting on a Facebook or a Google identity as being your identity is kind of creepy in all of the ways that you'd kind of imagine. Well, actually, probably you guys wouldn't imagine because you're in Silicon Valley, it sounds like with all your friends. But imagine other parts of the world where that's not necessarily built-in part of your world. I would suggest we can do something interesting, though, at this juncture. What you'd use is sign everything. So everything is signed by the person that wrote it, and using a public-private key pair. There is a public-private key pair in widespread use. It's Bitcoin. And Bitcoin, their address structure has got a bounty for somebody that can try to break it. If you can break that system, you can get very, very wealthy on the, by going stealing other people's Bitcoins. So there's a big bounty towards keeping that system secure. Why don't we just use those address pairs? There's all the tools to go and generate those address pairs of internet, of Bitcoin addresses and the private keys. Great, so that can work. That we could basically be able to use them. Another nice thing you get from it is if you sign things using your Bitcoin address, you know who you could tip. So you'd know who wrote something, and you'd have a direct mechanism right away of being able to go and plunk money into them if they wanted the donations. Smarter people and I are working on how we can take the next step to go and encrypt materials such that if you pay a certain number of, say, Bitcoins or whatever comes next in distributed currencies, that you can then unlock it and be able to see it. So we might be able to have a distributed mechanism of charging for the distribution of materials if we pick our identity system well. So I would like to argue that we can have WordPress, but distributed. So just going down the list of sort of the necessary technologies, I've seen all of the pieces in disparately. I've worked with the different communities to see these things basically work. They're not working together yet, and that's why I'm here and talking about this, is to try to spirit us towards building a distributed web that brings us privacy, it brings us reliability in space and time, so reliability in terms of versions, time, space, no matter where you are, that you'd be able to get reliable access. The idea is to lock the web open. Can we make openness irrevocable? Can we bake the First Amendment into the code itself? Can we make it so that our values of privacy, universal access to all knowledge, are built into our tools in such a way that it becomes irrevocable, that it's just the way the system works? And then I suggest, ready for the next step. A distributed web. This is probably not going to be built by an Internet Archive alone. It needs to be seen as desirable by another bunch of players. Started to talk about it with different folks where they're starting to chisel off certain pieces of it. And if I'm successful, we'll rally behind and make something that's as easy and fun to use as the current web, but has these other characteristics. Thank you very much. We have yes, David. You've been just going saying no, no, no all through my talk.
Right. All right. For a number of reasons.
Okay.
First, my credentials for talking about this. We, as a Vox program here, have been running.
What is the logs? What does that stand for?
Lots of copies, keep stuff safe. We've been running a distributed web archiving system now for 17 years.
Yes.
And it's really hard. You have been skating over a huge number of problems that, these are problems that people have been working on for a long time. So, for example, you're trying to build this out of injecting code into people's browsers.
Yes.
For at least the last decade, Van Jacobson and others have been trying to build this as a replacement for IP. doing exactly what you want. It's called, it used to be called content-centric networking. It's now, it's one of the 4 big NSF future internet funded projects, and it's really hard. There's a lot of very difficult crypto that's needed in order to make this work. And people have been working on this for a long time. It's not that I'm objecting to building a version of this by building it into people's browsers and layering it on top of IP, but you need to be looking at how it would work once we can get rid of IP and do this stuff at the IP level instead of by layering it on top of IP. Because as we see, for example, with Tor and with Bitcoin, the blockchain, there are real problems in building this kind of system on top of a system which actually reveals a lot about what's going on. And Van's team at USC or wherever I think they are now, they've been designing the system so that you can run IP on top of their system, you can run their system on top of IP, and it doesn't reveal, even when it's running on top of IP.
I'm going to add that to the slide,
right?
right? So it's a layer. Yes, that people have been working on these things and that they're hard is true. All the pieces, though, I think are close to being able to be woven together into things that would be useful enough that would cause a positive loop.
As I said, I'm not against, I think it's a very good idea. It's the way that Van's been working, layering this stuff on IP as an interim measure. I'm just saying there are real problems with interim systems getting very popular. Let's talk about IFS at Park, for example. And you need to be looking at how it would work once IP underneath goes away and it's replaced by something that actually does this, because otherwise you could lock out what needs to happen eventually.
Okay.
That's one point. Secondly, I think people are far too optimistic about the security and fraud resistance and so on of Bitcoin. The Bitcoin network is dominated by about 5 large miners in China. And you may like to trust these anonymous groups of miners in China, but I don't. And at least 2 of those big miners have been observed defrauding people using Bitcoin. So the blockchain is a great idea, but it has serious economies of scale problem. The reason it's dominated by these big miners in China is that it's cheaper for them to mine Bitcoins than it is for anybody else. And you get the same economies of scale problem anytime you try and build a huge peer-to-peer system. There's a reason why the Internet Archive is the biggest web archive in the world. It's because there are economies of scale in web archiving. And it's really, really difficult to avoid peer-to-peer distributed systems getting centralized simply because of economies of scale.
As Larry Lessig pointed out, we've underestimated the power of the network effect, or these sort of this centralization, this monopolization that comes through some of these technologies. I mean, even email, which is probably for one of the most distributed systems still alive, is really kind of collapsing into Gmail just because we can't seem to keep the spam out of it. So I agree. It does require a lot of work to try to make distributed systems work. We're fraught with failures. I think the Bitcoin thing is absolutely fantastic, though, because you can actually see all the fraud structures happening. It's in this very open place where you can actually see the blockchain split and go through trauma, where we weren't really privy to that when that equivalence happened in 2007, 2008 in the United States Federal Reserve. I have faith that there's a lot more. Faith is probably the wrong. Observe that the iterations are going a lot faster in that particular area. So is it there yet? No. certainly don't have most of my money in Bitcoin, but I did pay for sushi with Bitcoin just this last week. Eugene.
Just as a point for your list, Ward Cunningham, who we're trying to get, is working on a new topic that he calls Federated Wikis, which address a lot of this. He has working code, and of all people, of all corporations, he has Nike behind him.
Okay, that's an interesting one.
That's just to let you know, we're trying to arrange for Ward to speak.
Ward Cunningham.
Yeah.
And
he did
Wikis. So these are great people to be working on these things.
Who is we?
Dennis and I.
Oh,
Okay. I mean, the class, the infrastructure class is.
I think one of the biggest challenges here now is the apps. A huge increasing proportion of the time, the eyeballs is going to the apps now.
Yes.
And unless you can figure out how to incorporate the apps into your ecosystem, you may be relegated to irrelevance.
Yeah, if the World Wide Web becomes about as useful as FTP, it's still useful but not exciting, then we really will have lost something. And it does seem like we're getting a lot moved over into apps, and I wonder why. Some of it is, good integration within the systems, but also there's the promise of making money is one of them. And I think it's the promise, because if we look at it, they're probably about as likely to make money as rock stars are to.
But the other thing is performance. In other words, they can actually make effective use of the many cores within a single process. And there's 1 or 2 orders of magnitude of performance in that you're not going to get with a single threaded JavaScript. So that's a huge problem.
Interesting point. Are we getting anywhere with multi-threaded JavaScript? People are starting.
By the ECMAScript committee that, quote, JavaScript will be forever single-threaded.
There are reasons for that, and there's performance ways to get around it, but you code differently. So you have multiple threads of control.
So I was encouraged to see a Macintosh run in JavaScript. So maybe I shouldn't be. If I can see an iPhone run in JavaScript, maybe that I should be a little more prepared.
If you can see a highly multi-threaded, Android game app running in JavaScript at performance, then maybe there's hope.
Okay.
So, on that front, you might not have heard, but Rockford announced yesterday at PayPal the Safe JavaScript project, SEIF.
Okay.
If you don't know about it, you should check it out. And I'm sure he would argue with some of these performance arguments about JavaScript, but nonetheless, it's trying to build a secure foundational core. I mean, it's responsible for safe mode, the latest IETF spec, mostly Rockford. And right now they're starting with making that secure messaging. Basically, it's safe node, so it's taking Node.js, right, securing it primarily as a transport layer, and right now gluing it to something called Qt, or Qt, I don't even know how to pronounce it. But anyway, PayPal just announced it. He just
good.
There's videos out there.
Good. It's going to require this because people say, yeah, JavaScript isn't actually secure. As we've been able to see, you can be in one tab and see another. There's going in securing reader privacy is really, really hard. And I'm not.
Encryption to the transport layer is a base function.
Fantastic.
Doug Rockford is in the room here, if you might want to respond to that.
I didn't see you.
Okay. I love being here at Stanford. This is completely great.
Do you want to respond?
Doable or being done?
I'm sorry?
Is it doable or being done to make JavaScript be a distributed?
It is in progress. It's too early to make any claims yet, but we're developing it in the open, so we can pass that at home. Otherwise, it'll be zero.
And the first version is available.
The first component is available.
I think at least we need a mechanism of moving code around that doesn't require permission from the browser to be able to run. That it's basically a user-initiated piece of code that runs kind of nominally at speed enough to be able to do, I would say WordPress, but maybe we have to set our sights higher on gaming to be able to make something that's fun and interesting and will keep people engaged and not drain away from the open web. Yes?
So we just identified as part of a consortium a vulnerability with using the blockchain inappropriately. The blockchain is very good at keeping a historical record of all the entries that have been made.
Yes.
But that means it's impossible to erase a mistake. It's also possible to induce somebody to point to the wrong entry. and use an older version rather than the most recent one of a particular item.
Okay.
And so unless the history, the journaling is important, maybe the blockchain is not the best way to present a snapshot of the current version of something, when that's the thing that matters most.
The thing that I find attractive about blockchain in this discussion is some of the possibilities of doing in distributed naming structure. So it's just as a distributed database of names and address pairs to make it so we don't have to have hashes. Like I love those slides that have their people's PGP numbers on the bottom. I was like I'm going to type that.
But that's exactly a potential problem there, because the owner of the name is the most recent one to claim the public key. And that can lead to problems where I could get you to point to my entry that was earlier in the blockchain. So that may not be the best solution for things where the most recent version is the only one you want people to see.
There's something else that I like about Bitcoin. I realize this is a mixed crowd on the Bitcoin thing. Is it pops a particular truism that I've been hearing since, well, Waze didn't succeed. So I did a system called Waze, Wide Area Information Servers. Claim to fame came before Gopher in the web. It was awesome. But the web really took off and won. And I think of it, it's not a competition there in the sense that I just wanted anything open to work. So it wasn't sort of another era of DECnet or SNA applied to the content layer of our networks. And one of the truisms was it has to be really, really simple, right? It has to be, so easy that, only the simple survives. And Bitcoin, is actually doing quite well, and it's one of the most complicated things I've seen in the open. It is wild. I mean, of course it's got peer-to-peer as just part of it, and it's got this sort of this shared ledger system across places. It's got crypto that actually makes it so that I can have a public-private key campaign and actually have it work, which I've never been able to really get to work with my email systems. And so it's a system that is really complicated, was baked enough by the time it came out that it's actually surviving a certain level of attack. Whether it's going to conquer the world, I don't know. But it was the JavaScript aha and the Bitcoin where you can actually, if you get it right, you can have a complicated system survive. And even if it's coming out of the open world. And so that's gave me sort of gusto to really see, okay, maybe we can actually make this thing work. And it's the only way, selfishly, I can see to be able to archive living websites. To not just take snapshots at the end of the day, but to actually make it so that as people want to graduate, they want to move on to other projects, they want to do whatever, that cultural institutions are going to be sophisticated enough to be able to do this, to be able to keep these our cultural history moving forward. Otherwise, I haven't figured it out. Just because he hasn't asked yet. Yeah.
So how would you stop this being dominated by spam and advertising?
Probably the same way the World Wide Web, is the doesn't, right? I mean, it just you have to find your way to it. But if you find your way to, at least as far as my vision is pretty shallow compared to actually, it's like, can we build WordPress, right? Is then can we get it to the right WordPress and know that you're there? Can you go and make that work? We still have the same navigation structures problems of people going and spoofing and the like. But then can we keep it secure such that the administrators stay on top of their WordPress so it doesn't get hijacked by somebody else? I think we can do that. So that level, if we scope the problem to there, I think we can win. Another nice thing is if we build in a business model structure, then we don't encourage people to go and put these weird ads on it. And those ads are just bugs. They're just web bugs that are they feel creepy and awful. I think that Snowden's pointed out that we've really built a system that is starting to be kind of creepy. And that might be another thing that puts us into Carl's idea of going over into the walled garden of the policed Apple ecosystem, right? That if the open world isn't safe, we're going to retreat. So let's go and make the open world safe to live in. Let's make it so that we aren't encouraged to try to make money by being creepy. We have technologies that are there that actually work, that we've actually built some systems that are fun to use by large numbers of people.
Yeah, but there's one important point here, and that is WordPress is notoriously insecure.
I'm just talking. Yes. So well, maybe that's innate. I don't think it's innate. Carl, and then
We need some way to authenticate public keys. In other words, I need to know that this long string of digits really is Brewster's public key, and not the public key of some intelligent system middleman that's claiming to be my Brewster.
Carl?
So I could go down to, for example, you could go down to the Bank of America and authenticate your public key, and they publish in a directory. And then if you're really paranoid, you could go over to Wells Fargo, right? They publish in the directory, right? And then when I go to my contacts, I query both of them, and if they're different, then there's something fishy going on. But we do need that mechanism, and we do not have it now.
Carl, I would change one word you said, not his public key, but one of his.
One of your public
You
keys,
can have many.
sure. Right.
okay. So
And
there's going
hopefully
in time.
one of them that you haven't revoked with Bank of America.
So tying online pseudonymous identities to real identities should be, the option of those that are employing it, and it should be easy and transparent for people that are using these to know whether they're tied to real entities or not in the real world. Agreed. I don't have any better way of doing that than some of the others that have been talking about this. But if we build at least the pseudonymous structure, I'm hoping that that option goes, so we don't build a system that requires it to be tied to real identities to begin with, because I think we would lose too much in terms of publishing.
The problem is actually harder than that, because you don't really want it to be, I go someplace to validate some random string, because most of the time people are not going to bother to do the work. The string actually, as the IPFS people sort of missed, is it's not just DNS names are not location, or IP numbers are not location. DNS names are not location, they're also a notion of who. When it says Disney.com, I think I know something. And if it's some opaque string that I have to go someplace to figure out if it's Disney, I'm not ever going to do the validation. I'm just going to trust, get burned, go back to walled garden. So the names have to be in some sense self-signing in a way that is actually usable. And it doesn't involve going to Wells Fargo. Right? It can't involve going to Wells Fargo.
So there is a way to do that.
It's easy to do, but you've got to bake the name into the encryption.
So I want to question the centrality of identity that you put in there. I actually think identifier is important, but that necessarily making identity central is not important.
I think we need an identity system in the sense that their blog will know it's you coming back.
That's right.
So you need at least that level of sort of, here are the admins for this website, and then they can go and...
I need someone who has permissions, a set of permissions that happen to map to what the admin can do.
Okay.
You can do that without identity, and...
Identity in the sense of knowing who the human is?
No, identity...
You're getting over my head.
Yeah, so the basic idea is we often use identity as a proxy for what we really want, and I think you're doing that. So in particular, when I make a request of your service, what's the most important question you should ask?
I don't know what.
Should you honor the request? Am I authorized to make this
Okay.
request? And you don't need identity to do that. I could present an access token, right?
I guess I'm thinking that we're already there. I think.
Well-
But why don't we, because it gets
Yeah, we'll talk
deeper
offline.
than
We'll
I
talk
can
offline.
get pretty quickly. Yes.
Good at this. Dirk Spitz with Centric kind of comments on my computer.
You're going to have to speak up because
Okay,
nobody can hear you.
It's on my list of things to try to figure out how to, it's kind of a vicious, the same thing you're trying to do, which is to build an ultimately totally private reader situation on the drive.
Okay.
So the thing that I don't know if we can solve this, but at least it's interesting, a lot of smart people in the room. There's a couple of things we can do, right? We could put many terabytes in a phone. We can fill and recache them every night, overnight, at a usually speed 4 megabits per second. Which means I can pull everything that's public down to my phone and use the intelligence of my phone, which is the cumulative experience of my interests and whatever, which stays on the phone.
Okay.
And browse through all that public stuff, throw everything out I don't want, and then just pull everything in that I want. And since I'm throwing out stuff I didn't want, but you don't know what that is.
Right, sort of keep the channel full of noise.
I now have a lot of stuff sorted from even more stuff on a daily basis, let's say 5 terabytes. And that, if you build something that allows me to pull stuff privately, meaning
Yes.
I can make it very snappy after it's been on my phone for one night.
I want that ton. If you're from Samsung and you're going to give me a terabyte phone, I'll take it. Also, make it so that there's cheap enough.
More valuable than a 64 megabyte phone because it's private.
Because it's private. And if we have enough of a channel that we can go in and waste some of our bandwidth, I think is absolutely
Terabyte
key.
does not weigh more than a tenth of your.
How much of that terabyte is JavaScript so that when you go there, it's dialing home and telling them exactly what you're reading?
It's do the math, terabyte downloaded to your phone at USB 3 speeds in the charger is exactly less than an hour. So if your phone is in a charger at night and you happen to have access to the internet in a low-cost way, pulling a terabyte into a phone costs nothing.
That was the point.
It costs nothing from what
But it isn't like that anymore. It's not static content that you download and
It
read.
certainly is. Anybody who has anything to say, he's archiving it, has said it at least the day before I read it. Every video that I make.
No. It's not HTML any longer.
I'm not
It's
making
JavaScript.
I'm not making that argument. I'm making the argument that content is more than a day's worth of information is read after a day.
I'm not getting across. Your idea that it's private depends on the idea that you download it and then read it, and it doesn't talk to the outside world. That's the way the web was 10 years ago. It's not the way the web is any longer. The way you read sites is you get some JavaScript which incrementally loads the site as you read it.
Okay, but David, there is, at least if you take JavaScript, he's right. If you take WordPress, right now we go and use centralized resources on that website to go and do the search engine and the database function. To go and show that you can actually download that given the current bandwidths. As I did it for a dorky little site. Would it work for Wikipedia? Actually, maybe. Interestingly, but most sites are not as even big as, would it work for Google? Absolutely not. But there are an awful lot of sites that, if we code it right, can be distributed in such a way that you don't need to touch the server for things. When we were doing the original web, often these things were tied to an organization. This was a face of an organization, and we tied to it because it used some resources at the place. But more and more of the web communities I'm seeing are tied less and less to institutions. They actually just live in the cloud. And if they live in the cloud, then they can be encapsulated and ported around. Some of it's functional, some of it's code, and some of it's static, but that is actually movable just based on the computing capabilities that are now in phones, thanks to these guys, as well as some of the bandwidth. So it's at least, I think, going for a large sector of what we currently use as the web, and I think it can still be fun and interesting and playful to answer some of Carl's complaints about, is this going to be good enough to do games? I think we can do interesting things with movable websites that would be able to be hosted in multiple places and transported around. That's just by watching how most websites work. Yep.
Okay, I am, in this sense, a very naive person. I have been told by a friend who dealt with large data that we are now at the point of generating approximately 1 zettabyte of content a year. It goes up. A terabyte is nothing. A terabyte is invisible.
But when we notice this, we have 1 billion smartphone users with a terabyte. Each have that terabyte. The question is, what does their terabyte need to have, and why can it be up fresh every night in an hour?
But some
The answer
things.
is it's a lot of terabytes times 1 billion.
So that's the argument that we're moving along on our storage technology, and some of these numbers that you're coming across are based on how cheap it is to store it. But movies or textual websites, dominantly audio websites, they're not getting that much bigger each. I mean, they can get bigger because the technologies are making it so, but there's a class that works quite well. We don't have to be able to port around everything to be able to make a system work for a very large number of people that want to publish privately. They want to read privately. They'd like to have sort of this Git type of function to their websites, that there is a class that this could work very well for. That's the argument.
I agree that it's a class, but what about paywalls, for example? They want me to pay for the content. That would require a phone home, and that would require knowing what I'd seen. There are websites now.
Not necessarily.
There are websites now that are one page. It's all JavaScript. There's one URL, and it just changes all the time, and what you see depends on what you did. And there's no way to predict all possible human interactions with that page because it's dynamic. So while you can do it for much content, there's much content that won't work.
David.
Okay, you need to read a paper by Georgios Koutaxis and Monica Chu at the Web 2.0 Security and Privacy Workshop called Tracking Protection for Firefox in Firefox for Privacy and Performance. It gives you some idea of what is actually going on with popular websites. Yes, it's perfectly true that things like my blog and so on, which are completely irrelevant in the web, are things that you could read privately. But things like the New York Times or something like that, if you turn on Firefox tracking protection, you get rid of about, where was it? It's about 2/3 of the total data download. And almost all of that is completely invisible to the reader. It's there because it's gathering information.
So I'm going to take this as encouraging, right? That there's even the New York Times is bugging the hell out of us. So let's go and find a mechanism not only that we have the technologies for ourselves, for your blog, which actually isn't completely worthless, but to make it so that the New York Times could find a way of going and publishing online without feeling that it's got to go and rent out its mailing list to everybody and their brother to try to make it work. And I think we can do this. I don't think we have to have phone home to be able to make money. The ransomware guys are actually figuring some of this out. That's not a great model to go and follow, but the idea of being able to go and hold something encrypted until you go and pay with a set of Bitcoin to go and unencrypt it is showing that it is possible to try to sell something over the internet without revealing who you are. And so, not great guys to follow, but it's at least a proof of concept that we can actually make a billing system that works. Yes?
Economics point of view, right? So let's say you sell 100 million phones, or your Apple, you sell more. Now, why the fuck would New York Times not let the content fly to a phone that's designed differently for people who want privacy? It's completely.
Well, the argument here is you don't need to. The argument is that we can make a World Wide Web that works, even if Apple and Samsung and Google and those guys don't agree. If we can, then that's just trying to think ahead.
There is really good economic reason to make a private phone.
I would claim there's no reason to believe, to make no economic reason, because if people cared, they wouldn't cost $1,000 to buy certified phones from the Defense Department phones. We've shown repeatedly that people will give away passwords for a cookie, a chocolate chip cookie.
Okay.
And that's not what today is, it's what tomorrow must be. And, we didn't have cell phones. People didn't.
So we've got the conversation. I'm speaking most, but then there's this long. There's a very long tail. I'd like to hear from the rest of the long tail. We're about at an hour. Is there any comments that people would like to do before we sort of sum up? This is a call to action. It's basically a tessellation of explanations that there are technologies that can go and cause this. IPFS, who was Juan Bennett, who was here a couple weeks ago, showed pieces of this. It's really is it desirable enough to work together to try to get it here? And just would like to, long tail. Yes, you're still on the fat tail.
Listen to the arguments, and I got to say, I think Bruce has got something here. I would want to support it.
Hey, okay,
I think the pieces are here. I think the problems are hard, but they're not insurmountable. And I think we need some fresh thinking to just close the gap on the final issues.
Thank you. Anything else? You don't have to say Rie Brewster, but just anything else on? No? Then we're done. Thanks very much.